Are you a greedy profit maxer? Is Nvidia's 145% return over the past year not sufficient to fill the gaping hole in your heart? Well, fear not, because I've got a way for you to scratch that gambling itch, provided you are insanely bullish for 2025. So join me as we continue to go off the deep end and fall into the loving arms of financial degeneracy. In my last video, we talked about Nancy Pelosi's latest moves, but I didn't really touch on the fact that she also doubled down on Nvidia, buying 50 calls with $80 strikes expiring January 2026. So the question becomes, how can we use this information to greed max? And should we attempt to mirror Nancy's moves on Nvidia? I like how you're thinking, but what if I told you there's an even more cravenly unhinged and depraved way for us to maximize our tendies? Forget about Nvidia stock. I'm talking about NVDL, a 2x leveraged Nvidia ETF that essentially gives you 2x exposure to Nvidia's performance. Maybe we buy some of those shares, right? No, my friends. We're going to get even more disgusting with it. I'm not talking about shares. I'm talking about NVDL leaps. Buying a leap on NVDL, the Nvidia 2x shares ETF, can be a strategic move for investors. And by strategic, I mean it lets us greed max in a big way. But obviously it does come with some serious risks. Let's start our discussion by salivating over a couple of the pros of buying NVDL leaps. First of all, there's the insane amount of leverage you can get by using NVDL. Just buying shares of NVDL offers 2x exposure to Nvidia's stock performance. That means 2x its gains and 2x its losses. If you want to get even crazier with your bullish thesis, you could buy a leap on NVDL, which could amplify your returns even more. It's one of the greediest plays I've conceived of in a while, but if you know a better way to greed max, let me know. An NVDL leap is a highly efficient use of capital. This is definitely not the same thing as saying it's a good idea. Buying 100 shares of NVDL would cost you about $7,700, but buying a leap expiring January 2026 with an 85 delta would cost you around $4,000, which is only half of what it would cost to buy the shares. And doing this would theoretically give you exposure to 85% of the gains made by the underlying NVDL shares. This is what I'm talking about when I say NVDL leaps provide a crazy amount of leverage. First, they give you 2x exposure to Nvidia's performance, and on top of that, you've got the additional built-in leverage that options provide. Based on some quick math, I think this provides us with 4x leverage on the underlying Nvidia shares. A couple of other things to point out before we get to the cons. Leaps are just basically longer dated call options, generally expiring a year out in time, meaning that unlike near to expiration calls, NVDL leaps provide longer term exposure to its underlying assets, giving Nvidia more time to navigate market fluctuations and for the growth catalysts we've hallucinated for it to play out. Buying leaps is a defined risk strategy, meaning you know what your potential total loss is up front. In this case, the total loss for our NVDL leap would be $4,000. Just keep in mind that given NVDL's leveraged nature, expect sharp declines during market pullbacks. Okay, now that we're all excited about potentially 4xing Nvidia's performance in 2025, let's talk about how this can blow up in our faces. There are obvious risks here as far as data decay and this strategy's excessive reliance on leverage. As a leverage ETF, NVDL is designed for short-term trading and resets daily. This means that over time, its returns can deviate significantly from Nvidia's performance due to the compounding effects of the daily resets. Buying a leap on NVDL will amplify those distortions even more. This is really the most significant downside if we're comparing NVDL leaps to normal Nvidia leaps, and it does lend itself to a broader discussion of the risks associated with leveraged ETFs in general. So let's spend some time diving into the why behind it. The goal of a leverage ETF like SOXL or NVDL is to deliver 2x the daily return of their underlying assets. The key word here is daily, meaning the leverage resets at the end of each trading day. That's why these ETFs are designed for short-term trading rather than holding long-term. Take a look at this example of the compounding effects and we'll go over the math afterwards. Let's assume that Nvidia stock moves like this over the course of 3 days. On day 1, it goes up 5%, on day 2, it goes down 5%, and again on day 3, it goes up 5%. So let's look at how the math shakes out for Nvidia. We're going to assume that both Nvidia and NVDL start off at $100 per share to keep the math simple. So Nvidia starts out at $100. After day 1, it goes up 5%, so we end the day at $105. After day 2, it sinks 5%, so we end the day at $99.75. And finally, after day 3, it goes up 5% again, so we end the day at $104.74. A net loss of 0.26% over day 1. The math shakes out a bit differently for our leveraged ETF. Again, we're assuming NVDL starts out at $100. So after day 1, the 5% return Nvidia made by our 2x leverage factor means that we'll probably end the day at $110. After day 2, NVDL declines 10%, so we end the day at $99. And finally, after day 3, we're up 10% and end the day at $108.90, meaning that over day 1, we have a net loss of minus 1.1%. So even though Nvidia nearly breaks even at minus 0.26%, NVDL's compounding effect and leverage results in a worse return of minus 1.1%. Over time, this divergence could grow larger and larger as it compounds, especially in volatile markets. So when you buy a leap on NVDL, the distorted returns of the ETF due to compounding can make it harder to predict how your leap will perform relative to Nvidia's stock. If NVDL drifts downward over time due to daily recess and volatility, even if Nvidia's stock goes up modestly, your leap could still end up potentially losing money. Or in a best case scenario, it'll fail to appreciate as much as you'd hoped. So a leap on a leverage ETF might underperform or behave unpredictably because of its underlying leverage mechanics. Let's assume you're certain that Nvidia's stock will rise from $146 to $180 by the expiration date of January 16, 2026. Here's how the two options might compare. Let's assume that Nvidia stock goes from $146 to $180, a 23% return. So Nvidia, being a 2x leverage ETF, would theoretically return double that amount, 47%. But as we just discussed, the effects of compounding leverage decay could potentially reduce this return. So here are the pros and cons of just a regular old Nvidia leap. First of all, you get direct exposure to Nvidia's actual stock performance without any leverage decay risks. And second, a leap on Nvidia will respond more predictably to its underlying price movement by avoiding the inane mechanics of leveraged ETF behavior. The cons are that a leap on Nvidia would be more expensive upfront because its per share price is higher than that of NVDL, which is currently trading at about $77 a share. Also, there's the opportunity cost of a major price surge, meaning you'll get a less impressive gain than if you were to have used NVDL. Obviously, you're going to want to substitute the term opportunity cost with craven greed. Not to get too nutty on you, but I wouldn't be surprised to see a major price surge randomly at some point in 2025 post-earnings, because my investment advisor seems to think it'll happen. Based on the call she bought, I'm deducing that she's expecting Nvidia to at least hit $170 a share in 2025. Take that with a grain of salt. Actually, take it with a whole shaker. Let's talk about our second option, a leap on NVDL. The pros are an amplified exposure to Nvidia's price movements, meaning a 47% theoretical gain for the underlying, as opposed to the 24% from our previous assumptions. There's also the fact that using NVDL leaps requires a much smaller initial capital investment due to the underlying's lower per share price. As for the cons, we've already discussed the major one, leverage decay risk. NVDL's performance over time might diverge from its targeted 2x return, especially in choppy markets. Another con is higher risk premiums. Options on NVDL have a much higher implied volatility, meaning pricier contracts. They also have a much lower trading volume, probably because most people realize doing this is kind of insane. So you should probably factor that in before doing this. If it was such a home run, you'd think more people would be trying it. As we've discussed before, it's harder to predict NVDL's performance due to the complexity of the underlying leverage mechanics. So predicting the performance of a derivative of this already convoluted levered financial product will be an even screwier undertaking. So which is better? If Nvidia's move to $180 happens in a smooth, relatively short time frame, ideally in a few days or a few weeks, a leap on NVDL will probably outperform a leap on Nvidia by a lot. But if Nvidia takes longer to rise, like months or even until close to the leap's expiration, or if there's significant volatility along the way, a leap on Nvidia would probably be the safer and more predictable choice. Really, it boils down to whether or not you're truly confident in Nvidia's price target and whether or not we can expect a smooth ride. I'm a bit apprehensive about the smooth ride part, but the leap on NVDL could potentially maximize returns. Obviously, the safest thing to do would be to just buy shares of Nvidia. That way, there's no time constraint before your investment turns into a big fat zero. To recap, the main risk of a levered ETF is a leverage decay and its potential compounding effect on losses. And if you're using call options against a levered ETF, this can obviously have catastrophic consequences for your initial investment. So here's the bottom line. If you're a degenerate like me, you may be getting a bit overeager, and I don't blame you. Buying a leap on NVDL is obviously a lot more exciting if you're the sort of person for whom 145% return over the past year is pathetic and unacceptable. It comes with risks, but you know what? So does life. So if you have $4 or $5 grand to burn, I don't know, you do you, I guess. I'm not gonna lie, I'm actually considering doing this. But honestly, a leap on Nvidia stock, like what Nancy did, might be a less insanely risky way to still make some pretty decent returns. Because if you're at the stage in your investing career where you're trying to outperform the queen, then you may need to seek professional help. Or call a gambling hotline. Let me know what you think of all this madness. Leave a comment, and if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like it and hit that notification button. And consider becoming a member of the cult of the almighty dollar. We're slowly growing more powerful, and together, we can spread the good word of shareholder capitalism throughout the world, and throughout time and space. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye for now.